So, hello everybody. It's nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me, Wendy. And tonight I'm going to give you a little bit of a background into what I do, really. I guess that what this brought up was the part in the Netflix series where I was very briefly interviewed, and my role as a researcher was mentioned in a way that I have to set straight. When you said you're in the Nicole's Daha circle, I'm actually not. I'm not part of the circle. I was at that moment part of the circle for 6 months, but in my role as a researcher. So I'm not connected to Nicole's circle in any way as a normal sitter. I'm connected actually to many circles as a researcher. And the work that I do, I work with the legacy of Professor Kate, which was a British physicist. He worked for the British government, and he was very interested in altered states of consciousness. He was a Zen master as well, and he was very interested in consciousness itself. And he, at one point, combined his knowledge with an electro engineer called Jeffrey Blundell, and together they made this apparatus that we're working with today. Obviously not the same one, because it's modernized. And what that does, it's working with EEG to measure brain waves and states of consciousness, which shows up in the software as patterns. Now, many years ago, I worked in also for the government and in IT, in big companies. So I have a little bit of a technical background. And I had no idea, as do many mediums, that I had mediumistic abilities. To me, mediumship or mediums, the concept of a medium was somebody on the carnival sitting with a glazed ball and producing a lot of nonsense. This was my concept at the time of mediums. And I knew that I was a very intuitive lady, and I had some mystical experiences when I was younger. But I had no concept of, placing them. I knew that something strange had happened, but I had no idea. Now, at one point, I started out going to the Art of Findlay College, which, by the way, I'm a trainee tutor there. I thought that I was going to start developing my intuitive side. I had no idea about mediumship. To make a long story short, I found out that I had some mediumistic abilities, and at one point I took a course which was called trance, and the teachers told us at that point that we were all in an altered state, but my experience was completely different from somebody else's experience. And I couldn't make head nor tail of it. I thought, this is a lot of nonsense. I have a logical mind. It doesn't make sense to me at all. So I'm going to stop this, because I have a very, analytical mind, and my mind needs to understand things in order to continue stuff. So I stopped it, and I asked my spirit team at that moment. I said to them, if you want me to continue with this, you have to, give me a way to make, sense of this. 3 months later, somebody, a friend of mine, who's a shaman, brought me a book, and she says, I don't know why, but you have to read this. And this was the book of Professor Kate. And as soon as I started reading it, I thought, this is it. This is what is going to make sense of my altered state. So I traveled the world, because at that moment there was nobody in the near vicinity, not in the country I live or the neighboring countries, who would do this. So I traveled the world to be measured with this method. And as soon as I was hooked up and I saw in very clear, very logical and easy patterns what was happening to me when I was in an altered state, it completely made sense. At that moment, it completely made sense. And I thought, okay, everybody who's doing anything remotely to do with mediumship needs to know this. So that was about 4.5 years ago. And I started to research other mediums. So I started to look at brainwave patterns of other mediums, when they have their eyes open, when they have their eyes closed, just sitting in altered states, and in every other capacity, when they're doing healing, etc., etc. And at one point, I met Nicole de Haas. And at that moment, I was a well-developed medium, as far as you can call yourself well-developed. And she asked me to measure her. And I had no idea about physical mediumship at that point. And one thing led to another. She asked me to work on one of her courses. And that brought me a lot of other mediums from all over the world. I have measured now over 400 mediums, from starting mediums who start to develop, to teachers, to from mental mediums, trance mediums, physical mediums, and everything in between. And for the last 3 years, this research was really valuable in many, many ways. So one part of the research is focused on mental mediumship and development of mental mediumship, and how that, or if that was the first question, does that show up in the brain? How can we see the difference between people who start to develop and when I look at them in their development and measuring from time to time, what can I see happening there within the brain, within their states of consciousness? So soon enough, I started to see patterns, and I started to see what was the logical steps. And also I saw what was, blockages, what was problems in development of a lot of mediums. And I coached them one-on-one, not in their mediumship, funnily enough, but with their state of consciousness. And as soon as that problem with their state of consciousness was resolved, the mediumship started to flourish. So there was really, for me, I could clearly see the link between states of consciousness and the development of the states of consciousness and their mediumship. And at that point, I started to second research and the research of physical mediums. Not being a physical medium myself, I was really interested in the phenomena, and obviously also in the people who are physical mediums, and what their state of consciousness would be, and if that would be significantly different from mental mediums. And the first thing that I found, I shared, I believe, in 2018, also in an interview, was that well-developed mediums, physical mediums, most of them don't go to a trance state at all. And this was groundbreaking at the time, because everybody thought that physical mediums, deep trance mediums, they call themselves, or people call them, do not even go to a trance state. And they were going to higher states of consciousness, which is profoundly different once you know what a deep state, a trance state is called a deep state, one of the deep states. What the difference is between deep states and higher states, because you train them completely different. And at that moment, I realized how many mediums would, have we lost along the way, because we trained them to go to deep states. Well, actually, we should have trained them to go to higher states of consciousness. And those who managed on their own, or maybe a stroke of luck, managed to go to those higher states of consciousness, how many of them, are there because of that stroke of luck and not because they trained that way? When I measured Nicole, and obviously everything I tell about Nicole and Stuart Alexander, which is one of my subjects in the research as well, I have permission to share. So when I measured Nicole, I could see that she was going to a higher state of consciousness. And like Nicole, I have had also somebody else, which I won't mention by name, going to the highest state of consciousness. And that lady, particular lady, was a teacher. And she said to me, I wish I'd known this years ago, because I would never have stopped sitting for trance. Because she stopped sitting for trance because she felt that she couldn't do what was asked of her. She couldn't go to that deep state. So she stopped. She thought I'm not a trance medium. This is one reason why I continue to do what I do, because I feel that this knowledge is vital knowledge for developing mediums. I am going to show you some sheets now. Obviously, I can talk about all the states of consciousness and brainwave patterns and everything to do with that for hours and hours. But I'm just going to show you some of it, which I think is important, and it's not easy to comprehend. So what you're seeing here, I hope you can see it. I'll move that away. What you see here is what is called, theoretically anyway, the trance state. This is one of the states of consciousness that was discovered or categorized by Professor Cade. And the trance state is one of the deep states, and it's a deep state because there is little to no beta brainwaves showing up in this pattern. The bars you see, for the people who have nothing to do with EEG or brainwaves, the bars you see, the amplitude shows the strength of the signal. Okay, so if the bar is out and a long bar, that means that the signal is strong. Now the red and the yellow bars are the brainwave, the beta brainwave frequencies. The green ones is alpha. I'm not going to explain what it all means, but you can see that this is like a Christmas, not like a Christmas tree, but maybe like going down like a pyramid. This is the pattern of the trance state. Oh, this is not good. Sorry. Now, this is the normal waking state. So people who do not go to an altered state, just, sit there with their eyes closed and haven't developed their state of consciousness, this is the pattern that they would show. As you can see, a totally different pattern from the trance pattern, because there's a lot of beta going on, obviously, because we're thinking or talking or whatever we do, we use those beta brain waves. Again, this is the trance state. This is the meditative state. Again, a completely different pattern. And the reason I'm showing this is to show you that the patterns are really easy, recognizable. And meditative state is also one of the deep states. Again, you can see that by the little to no brain waves or signal in beta at this point. Obviously, in the other categories, there is a signal. Now, those are the deep states and the normal waking state. This is one of the higher states of consciousness, which is called the diamond pattern. And unlike a deep state, there is some beta. So that doesn't mean that there's thinking going on, but there is some some beta activity going on that connect everything else. You can see that this is one of the higher states, and this means that the categories are connected in a different way than that there were separate categories like in the deep state. In the deep state, you could see the green bars, the alpha waves, as a separate category. And this, you can see it flows into one another. And this is what we see in theory, but this is how it shows up in my system. Like I said, very easy, recognizable patterns. Now, this is the pattern of Stuart Alexander. And as you can see, this is not a trance state. Even though you don't know nothing about the trance state, just by showing the pattern of the trance state and by looking at this pattern, you can see in one moment he's not going into that deep state. He's not going into a trance state. He's going into one of the highest states of consciousness that we actually recognize. What you also can see is that, and you can see that on top, is that in those theory patterns you didn't see gamma, but these are the gamma waves. The system actually measures up until 100 hertz. Now again, I can talk for hours about what it all means, but I just wanted to show you those patterns so you can see that he's not going into a deep state at all. Now I have measured Stuart Alexander when he was just sitting with his eyes open, sitting with his eyes closed, going into its altered state, but also when each and every one of his controls came through. So when the different controls came through, I was actually also able to measure whether that would show up as a different pattern, or whether I could see in the pattern, in the normal pattern that he would show, differences. Okay, there we are. So, this is the pattern of Nicole de Haas. Again, as you can see, it's not a deep state at all, because there is beta there, and there is this roundedness on top. There's a little bit of gamma, and what we can see here is also one of the higher states of consciousness. It's a variation on what we call the awakened mind pattern. Now, this is not her in an altered state. This is just her sitting with her eyes closed. Okay. Now, the brainwave pattern of Stuart Alexander was also not in his altered state, was just sitting with his eyes closed. But what you could see is when he was going to his altered state, there was more gamma going on. So that is the transcendent part of the brain. Now, again, you can see, I put this in just for reference. This is the trance state. And you can see that there's different categories here. So alpha is separate from theta, and that's separate from the delta region. Obviously, information still travels through all the frequencies, but it's not connected like in the higher states as just one flow. Now, this is very briefly about the patterns that you can very easily recognize and very easily see within the system. And like I said, there is a lot. I actually have lectures for over 1.5 hours, and I still don't have told people everything. So there's a lot more to discuss about these brainwave patterns and about the altered states. But I believe, and Wendy also mentioned this, I believe that once we find a lot more about consciousness development and brainwave development, we can actually find that there's a lot more people able to be psychic or develop their psychic skills, able to connect with spirit. And we will find that it's not a gift at all. It's something that I believe is a capacity of the brain, as long as we know how to utilize it. And yogis have found this with training their state of consciousness, with vigorously training their development in consciousness. They were able to get that psychic abilities, and they were able to get the mediumistic abilities, and they were able to bilocate, to levitate. So I'm not saying that that there is no spirit world, and I'm not saying that there is no mediumship. What I'm saying is that we're able to do so much more with our brain that when we get access to much more of our brain. And that means that we could have had more mediums, and we could have had maybe more physical mediums if we only know how to utilize that. So one of the things that I've done right now is develop a method for basically for people who have never done anything with mediumship, which I call the Awakening Mediumship Method, because I have coached mediums on an individual level as well. So I know what problems they encounter within their mediumship development, and not so much with their mediumship, but with their consciousness development. So I've found a method, and this is the first time I'm going to teach them in groups, to groups, because usually the last 3 years I did this with individuals, and now I'm going to teach groups, and hopefully prove to the world that everybody you know, is able to develop their mediumistic skills, as long as you know how to develop your consciousness at the same time. So I don't know if there's any questions, because I'm almost at the end of the talk.
There are some questions for you, Susan. Would you like a couple to start you off?
No, sorry, Karen.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Suzanne, that's fantastic. I'd like to throw it open to some of the other people who are teaching mediums first, before we get into the general questions.
Okay.
And people who are actually working in research in this area. Inga, could you like to come on and perhaps explain to Suzanne what you've been doing, and perhaps share some of your research and talk about how we can apply this to mediums? Inga, are you with us?
Oh, hello. Hi, Suzanne. Okay, so I work with Oksana. Andrea and Oksana, yeah? And so Oksana will come here not much the last 18 months, or 12 months since COVID. I'm just in the country on my own. So yeah, we have worked in the same way, not in any way as extensive as you have. So with just hooking up mediums, mental mediums, you know, physical mediums. And we found at the beginning, it was when we had a few, well, I call them natural physical mediums, you know, they really just never had to practice. They sit there, out, they're gone. So we found that very, very interesting to find, like, say, like the out of body pattern. Mm-hmm. And it was like, it's like eyes closed, gone, done. So I found it really interesting that over the last 2 years, the findings with a lot of mediums was exactly the same. The diamond pattern was very prominent in mediums, but they're all already developed mediums. So we haven't done anything in regards to work with mediums to develop this like you do. I think it's amazing. Such a good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Inga.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. Wow, Suzanne, that was fabulous. Thank you so much for showing the slides as well. It really brings it to life for all of us, even if we are not researchers or those who know much about the brain waves. One of the things that's happening for us is that we're starting to notice in this direct personal communication, the loving heart connections, is that people who have high anxiety, low levels of trust, a high control issues, those people are having, it's taking them longer to be able to kind of get in to the program. My question really for you, this is Wendy, sorry, not exactly what you're addressing, but my question for you, Suzanne, is have you done any research where you've just kind of looked at general population and then those people who have that lovely diamond shape to be able to, or whatever it might look like, to then put those people in training? Because it seems like you've kind of gone the other direction where you're looking at mediums and then looking at their brain waves as opposed to the opposite.
No, not really, in the sense that I haven't measured hundreds of people who are not mediums, but I can tell you that the patterns that I work with, obviously this is a very extensive database. The patterns that I work with are the normal waking state is for most of the population, really. So it's not the patterns that I have found are patterns that are already existing, right? So I'm just comparing them to a database. It's not that I have found those patterns and say, okay, now this is the patterns for mediums and that was already there. That was something Professor Kate already mapped and categorized. But on the anxiety and on the part that you asked about people who have anxieties and problems relaxing, yes. And the reason is because they have anxiety, they have a huge amount of beta going on. Okay, so there's this high beta going on. And this is because panic is high beta, is a very strong signal in high beta and also in the lower gamma region, which is a hyper focus, which comes with panic. Okay, which is quite natural. So there's a hyper focus coming in. But in order for them to reach that state where they are able to communicate with spirit and get their psychic senses, they need to get that down. So they need to relax. And once they have reduced those beta brainwaves and they relax, then alpha is coming up. And alpha is the one below beta. And when alpha is coming up, we make that connection with the subconscious. And this is where the spirit world works with us. Because below the subconscious is that delta region. And this is where we reach out to the field and get information. And then coming from the subconscious back to the conscious mind. And then we can translate that information. So yes.
Thank you.
Can
I just ask one more little tiny question
Sure.
before you move on? And are you using EFT or meditation, deep breathing? How are you utilizing the skills to get them to that beta level?
Of a biofeedback.
Biofeedback. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, because usually they are completely unaware. So first they need to get this awareness. So we use a form of biofeedback. Yeah.
Okay,
and
thank you so much.
Because you can train the state of consciousness without EEG at all. There's no need for EEG. Yogis don't do it with EEG. Okay.
Right.
So you just need to start recognizing where you're at your development, and then once you make that connection, you can find that place again. And then once you know what the next step is and how that feels and where you need to be, you can move on. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Suzanne.
Yeah, considerable relevance, especially the fact that we can reach many more people who can become developing mediums without expecting that they go into trance. I mean, that's a real epiphany. And so it is something that will help us as we try to find these mediums and nurture them, because we know there are many more of them in the population than are practicing right now. And so this gives us another way to do it.